It was just another quiet afternoon at the small-town gas station. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across cracked pavement. An elderly woman shuffled toward her car, leaning heavily on a cane. Her gray hair peeked out from under a wide-brimmed hat, and her faded sweater spoke of simpler times. No one paid much attention to her. To most people passing by, she looked like any other senior citizen, fragile, harmless, easy to overlook. But looks can be deceiving. What no one knew, not even the group of loud bikers revving their engines nearby, was that this seemingly frail woman had once been one of the world's deadliest spies. Years ago, governments whispered her name in hushed tones. Enemies feared her. Allies admired her. And now she lived quietly, blending into the background. But today, things were about to change. As the bikers laughed and shouted, one of them casually bumped into her cart, sending groceries tumbling to the ground. "Watch it, Grandma," he sneered, not bothering to help as she bent down to pick up her items. His friends roared with laughter. Little did they know, they had just made a grave mistake. Let me take you back to that moment when everything started. Picture this, a gas station in a sleepy little town. It wasn't fancy or modern. Just an old building with pumps outside and a tiny store inside where you could buy snacks, drinks, and basic supplies. The kind of place where everyone knows each other, or at least pretends to. The day was warm, but not too hot. The air smelled faintly of gasoline mixed with the earthy scent of dry grass. Cars came and went, some stopping for fuel, others just passing through. Most people didn't stay long. They filled up their tanks, grabbed what they needed, and left. In the middle of all this stood an elderly woman. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if every step required thought and effort. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the handle of her shopping cart. A cane dangled from one arm, ready to support her whenever she needed it. She wore a plain sweater that had seen better days, along with a skirt that reached her ankles. On her head sat a wide-brimmed hat that shaded her face from the sun. To anyone watching, she seemed unremarkable. Just another older person doing everyday chores. Maybe she lived nearby. Maybe she visited family in town. No one gave her more than a passing glance. After all, why would they? There was nothing special about her, at least, that's what everyone thought. But here's the thing, appearances can fool us. Sometimes, the quietest, most ordinary-looking person hides secrets so big they'd blow your mind. This woman was one of those people. Beneath her calm exterior lay a lifetime of adventure, danger, and skill. Once upon a time, she had been someone very important. Someone powerful. Someone who could make kings tremble and armies retreat. Years ago, before retirement, she worked as a spy. Not the kind you see in movies with gadgets and flashy cars, though she did have a few cool tools. No, she was the real deal. Governments hired her to do jobs no one else could. She traveled the world, gathering information, stopping bad guys, and saving lives, all without anyone knowing her name. Her missions took her to faraway places, snowy mountains, bustling cities, dense jungles. She spoke many languages, learned how to fight, and mastered the art of staying hidden. People called her the ghost because she moved silently and left no trace behind. If you crossed paths with her, chances are you wouldn't even notice. But then, after decades of service, she decided enough was enough. She wanted peace. Quiet. A chance to live a normal life away from danger. So she disappeared. She chose a small town where nobody would recognize her and started over. She became Emily Dawson, a sweet, harmless grandmother who baked cookies and tended to her garden. Or so everyone believed. On this particular afternoon, Emily had gone to the gas station to pick up a few things. Milk, bread, eggs, the usual stuff. Nothing exciting. As she loaded her groceries into the cart, she noticed a group of bikers nearby. They were loud, rowdy, and clearly enjoying themselves. Their motorcycles gleamed in the sunlight, engines rumbling like thunder. Leather jackets covered their arms, and tattoos peeked out from under their sleeves. One of them caught her eye. He was tall, muscular, and had a mean look on his face. His hair was shaved close to his head, and a thick beard framed his jaw. He reminded her of the tough guys she used to deal with during her spy days. The kind who thought they were untouchable. At first, Emily ignored them. She focused on her task, carefully placing each item in the cart. But then, something happened. One of the bikers, a younger man with wild hair and a cocky grin, walked past her. Without warning, he bumped into her cart. Hard. The impact sent her groceries flying. Bread rolls rolled across the ground. A carton of eggs cracked open, spilling yellow goo onto the pavement. Apples bounced in different directions, rolling under parked cars. "Watch it, Grandma," the biker sneered. His voice dripped with mockery, as if he found the whole situation hilarious. He didn't apologize or offer to help. Instead, he turned to his friends and laughed, pointing at the mess he'd caused. Emily froze for a moment. Then, slowly, she bent down to pick up her things. Her knees creaked as she lowered herself to the ground. Her fingers trembled as she reached for an apple. She didn't say anything. Didn't raise her voice or argue. She simply worked quietly, gathering her scattered groceries. The bikers, meanwhile, continued to laugh. They made jokes at her expense, calling her names and pretending to trip over her cane. To them, she was just an old lady, an easy target. Someone they could bully without consequences. What they didn't realize was that they had made a huge mistake. A really, really big one. You see, Emily wasn't just any old lady. She was a retired spy. A master of disguise, strategy, and combat. Those years of training hadn't left her. They were still there, buried deep inside, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And now, thanks to the bikers' rude behavior, that moment might come sooner than they expected. So, let's pause here for a second. Think about what you've read so far. What do you think will happen next? Do you believe Emily will let the bikers get away with treating her badly? Or does she have something else planned? Before we move forward, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Will Emily stand up for herself? Or will she walk away and let it go? Your guess might surprise you. Now, back to the story. As Emily picked up her last grocery item, she straightened up slowly. Her back ached, but she ignored the pain. She glanced at the bikers, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, her eyes locked with the leader, the tall, muscular man with the mean look. Something flickered in her gaze. Was it anger? Determination? Or maybe, amusement? Whatever it was, the biker didn't notice. He was too busy laughing with his friends. Too busy feeling invincible. But Emily saw him. Really saw him. She studied his posture, his movements, the way he carried himself. In her mind, she began piecing together a plan. A plan that would teach these men a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. For now, though, she kept her cool. She finished loading her groceries into the cart and started walking toward her car. Each step was slow and deliberate, as if she were thinking hard about something. And maybe she was. Because deep down, Emily knew one thing for certain: justice was coming. And when it arrived, it would hit hard. Emily reached her car, a small blue sedan that looked as unassuming as she did. She opened the trunk with a soft creak and began placing her groceries inside. The cracked eggs left a sticky mess on her hands, but she didn't seem to mind. Her focus wasn't on the groceries anymore, it was on the bikers. From where she stood, she could hear their laughter echoing across the parking lot. It wasn't just loud, it was mean-spirited. They weren't laughing because they were happy, they were laughing because they thought they were better than everyone else. And right now, they thought they were better than her. Emily had seen men like them before. Back in her spy days, she'd encountered plenty of bullies, people who thought their strength or power made them untouchable. But Emily knew something those men never understood: real strength doesn't come from muscles or motorcycles. Real strength comes from patience, strategy, and knowing exactly when to strike. As she wiped her hands on a napkin from her pocket, Emily allowed herself a small smile. These bikers had no idea who they were dealing with. To them, she was just an old woman, an easy target. But Emily wasn't weak. Far from it. Beneath her calm exterior lay years of training, discipline, and experience. She had faced far worse opponents than these guys, and she had always come out on top. Still, she didn't act immediately. Instead, she took her time. She closed the trunk gently, making sure not to slam it. Then she leaned against the car, pretending to catch her breath. In reality, she was observing. Watching. Learning. The leader of the group, the tall, muscular man with the shaved head, was pacing back and forth, showing off for his friends. He flexed his arms, revved his motorcycle engine, and shouted jokes that made the others cheer. He was clearly the center of attention, the alpha male of the pack. But Emily noticed something about him that the others might have missed: he was reckless. Overconfident. And overconfidence, she knew, was a fatal flaw. The younger biker, the one who had bumped into her cart, was different. He was smaller, leaner, and quicker on his feet. His movements were sharp, almost nervous, as if he were trying too hard to impress the leader. Emily guessed he was new to the group, eager to prove himself. That made him dangerous in his own way, but also predictable. The rest of the bikers hung back, watching and laughing. Some of them looked bored, while others seemed genuinely entertained by the chaos. None of them paid any attention to Emily. To them, she was invisible. Just part of the background noise. But Emily didn't need their attention. Not yet. For now, she was content to stay in the shadows, letting them underestimate her. Because the more they underestimated her, the bigger their mistake would be. While the bikers continued their antics, Emily's mind drifted back to her past. She thought about the missions she had completed, the enemies she had defeated, and the lives she had saved. Those memories felt like another lifetime ago, but they were still vivid in her mind. One mission, in particular, stood out. It had taken place in a snowy mountain village in Eastern Europe. The year was 1987, and tensions between rival nations were high. Emily had been sent to retrieve a stolen document, a map containing secret military locations. If the map fell into the wrong hands, it could have sparked a war. The mission had been risky. She had to sneak into a heavily guarded compound, avoid detection, and escape without being caught. At one point, she found herself face to face with a guard twice her size. He had a gun, but she had something better: speed and precision. With a single move, she disarmed him and knocked him unconscious. By the time reinforcements arrived, she was already miles away, the map safely tucked inside her coat. Thinking about that mission brought a sense of nostalgia. Back then, she had been at the peak of her abilities. Every challenge had been an opportunity to test her skills. Every victory had been a reminder of why she did what she did. But now she lived a quiet life. No more missions. No more danger. Just grocery runs, gardening, and occasional visits from her grandchildren. Or so it seemed. The truth was, Emily hadn't forgotten how to fight. She hadn't lost her edge. Retirement had given her time to reflect, to heal, and to enjoy the peace she had earned. But it hadn't erased the lessons she had learned. If anything, it had sharpened them. And today, standing in this gas station parking lot, those lessons were coming back to her. Loud and clear. Back at the center of the parking lot, The bikers were growing louder. Their laughter echoed off the nearby buildings, drawing curious glances from other customers. A few people shook their heads and muttered under their breath, but no one stepped forward to intervene. After all, who would dare stand up to a group of rowdy bikers? Except Emily. She watched as the leader strutted around, puffing out his chest like a peacock. He stopped near a parked truck and kicked its tire, leaving a scuff mark. Then he turned to his friends and said something that made them roar with laughter. Whatever it was, it must have been funny or cruel because they slapped each other on the back and cheered. Emily sighed softly. She had seen enough. These men weren't just rude, they were destructive. They didn't care about anyone but themselves. And if someone didn't stop them, they would keep causing trouble not just here, but everywhere they went. For a moment, she considered walking away. She reminded herself that she was retired, that she didn't need to get involved. She could drive home, make dinner, and forget this ever happened. But deep down, she knew she couldn't do that. Not this time. These bikers had crossed a line. They had disrespected her, mocked her, and ruined her groceries. Worse, they had shown no remorse. To them, she was nothing. Less than nothing. And Emily refused to let that stand. So she made a decision. A quiet, firm decision that sent a thrill through her veins. She wouldn't confront them right away, that would be too obvious, too risky. Instead, she would wait. Wait for the perfect moment. And when that moment came, she would show them exactly who they were dealing with. As Emily finished loading her groceries, she glanced at her reflection in the car window. The image staring back at her was familiar yet distant. Gray hair, wrinkled skin, tired eyes. On the surface, she looked like any other elderly woman. But inside, she felt alive. Energized. Ready. She thought about the cane resting against the car door. To most people, it was just a tool to help her walk. But to Emily, it was much more than that. It was a weapon. A reminder of the skills she still possessed. She had practiced with it countless times, learning how to use it for balance, defense, and even offense. One well-placed swing could disarm an attacker or knock him flat on his back. Of course, she didn't plan to use the cane today. Not yet, anyway. Today was about observation. About gathering information. About understanding her opponents before making a move. She scanned the parking lot again, taking note of every detail. The bikers' motorcycles were lined up neatly near the entrance, their engines gleaming in the sunlight. The leader's bike was the largest, with custom paint and chrome accents. It screamed arrogance, just like its owner. Nearby, a family was loading suitcases into their minivan. A young boy peeked out from behind his mother, staring wide-eyed at the bikers. Emily felt a pang of sympathy for him. Children shouldn't have to grow up thinking violence and intimidation are acceptable. Someone needed to teach these men a lesson, and Emily decided that someone would be her. Before getting into her car, Emily paused for a moment. She looked directly at the leader, meeting his gaze for the briefest second. He didn't notice, he was too busy joking with his friends, but she saw him. Really saw him. And she memorized everything, his height, his build, the way he carried himself. Information was power, and Emily intended to use it wisely. Then she climbed into her car and started the engine. The sound was quiet compared to the roar of the motorcycles, but it was steady. Reliable. Like her. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The bikers were still there, laughing and shouting. They had no idea what was coming. No idea that their fun was about to turn into something far more serious. Emily smiled to herself as she drove away. She had a plan. A good one. And when the time was right, she would put it into action. But for now, she would wait. Patience was key. Timing was everything. And Emily Dawson, retired spy, knew exactly how to play the game. The leader of the biker gang stepped closer. He was a big man, much taller than the elderly woman. His arms were covered in tattoos that looked like snakes crawling up his skin. His voice was loud and rough when he spoke. "You got a problem, old lady," he growled, leaning down to look her in the eye. He was trying to scare her. Trying to make her feel small. But she didn't flinch. Not even for a second. Instead, she looked right at him. Her eyes were calm, almost too calm. For just a moment, something flickered in her gaze, something sharp, something dangerous. It was there and then gone, like a flash of lightning on a dark night. After that, her face went back to looking gentle and kind, the way everyone expected an older woman to look. "I don't want trouble," she said softly. Her voice was quiet but steady, like a rock in the middle of a storm. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't backing down. What she said sounded polite, but it carried a hidden meaning. It was a warning. A message. But the bikers didn't understand that. They thought she was weak. Scared. Easy to push around. The leader smirked. His friends laughed louder, their voices filling the parking lot. One of them shouted, "Yeah, Grandma, maybe you should have stayed home." Another one snickered and added, "This ain't no place for someone like you." The leader kicked her cane aside. It clattered across the pavement, stopping near a puddle of spilled oil. The woman stumbled for a moment, caught off balance. But she quickly steadied herself, gripping the car door with one hand. To anyone watching, it looked like she was struggling. Like she was helpless. And that's exactly what the bikers thought. They saw her as defenseless. As someone they could bully without consequences. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. Deep inside, though, the woman smiled. Not on the outside, her face stayed calm, but inside, she felt a spark of excitement. These men had made a huge mistake. A very big one. By treating her this way, they had awakened something in her. Something they couldn't see yet. Something they wouldn't understand until it was too late. Let's pause here for a moment and talk about what was really going on. On the surface, it looked like a group of tough bikers picking on an elderly woman. That's what most people would think if they saw this scene. And that's exactly what the bikers wanted, to look strong and powerful while making someone else look weak. But appearances can be tricky. Sometimes, things aren't what they seem. This woman wasn't just any old lady. She was special. Different. Years ago, she had been one of the best spies in the world. She had faced danger countless times and always come out on top. Even now, in her retirement, she still had skills. Skills the bikers couldn't even imagine. When the leader kicked her cane away, he thought he was showing how strong he was. How untouchable. But what he didn't realize was that he had just shown his own weakness. He had shown that he underestimated her. And underestimating someone like her? That was a deadly mistake. Now let's take a closer look at the bikers. Who were they, really? What kind of people were they? The leader, the big man with the tattoos, was clearly in charge. He liked being the boss. Liked telling others what to do. He strutted around like a peacock, showing off for his friends. But deep down, he was insecure. He needed everyone to think he was tough because he didn't feel confident unless people feared him. The younger biker, the one who had bumped into her cart earlier, was different. He was smaller and quicker, but he also seemed nervous. Like he was trying too hard to fit in with the group. Maybe he joined the gang because he wanted to belong somewhere. Or maybe he thought it would make him feel important. Either way, he wasn't thinking for himself. He was following the leader, doing whatever the bigger man told him to do. The rest of the bikers hung back, laughing and cheering. Some of them looked bored, while others seemed genuinely entertained by the chaos. None of them cared about the elderly woman. To them, she was invisible. Just someone they could laugh at to make themselves feel better. But here's the thing, none of them understood what they were doing. They thought they were having fun. Bullying someone weaker than them. Showing off their power. But in reality, they were playing a dangerous game. A game they didn't know the rules to. Because the woman wasn't weak. Far from it. While the bikers laughed and shouted, the woman stood quietly by her car. On the outside, she looked calm. Harmless. But inside, her mind was working fast. She was analyzing everything: their words, their actions, their body language. She was piecing together a plan. She noticed how the leader held himself. Tall and proud, but also stiff. He wasn't relaxed. He was putting on a show, trying to act tougher than he really was. She noticed how the younger biker kept glancing at the leader, waiting for approval. She noticed how the others stayed close to their motorcycles, ready to run if things got out of hand. All of these details mattered. To her, they painted a picture. A picture of a group of men who thought they were strong but were actually fragile. Fragile because they relied on fear to feel powerful. Fragile because they didn't know how to handle someone who didn't play by their rules. The woman knew she could teach them a lesson. A lesson they wouldn't forget. But she also knew she had to be patient. Timing was important. If she acted too soon, she might lose the advantage. So she waited. Waited for the perfect moment to strike. When the woman said, "I don't want trouble," she meant it, but not in the way the bikers thought. To them, her words sounded like surrender. Like she was giving up. But to her, they were a message. A warning wrapped in softness. She knew the bikers wouldn't listen. They wouldn't understand. That was okay. She didn't need them to understand right away. All she needed was for them to keep underestimating her. To keep thinking she was harmless. Because the more they underestimated her, the bigger their mistake would be. As she leaned against the car door, steadying herself, she let her mind wander. She thought about all the times she had faced bullies like these men. People who thought they were untouchable. People who thought they could hurt others without consequences. She had dealt with them before, and she would deal with them again. Her thoughts drifted back to her spy days. Back then, she had learned how to read people. How to spot their weaknesses. How to use those weaknesses against them. She had trained herself to stay calm under pressure, to think clearly even when things got chaotic. Those skills hadn't left her. They were still there, buried beneath years of retirement but ready to resurface whenever she needed them. And today, she needed them. As the bikers continued to laugh and mock her, the woman planted the seeds of justice in her mind. She imagined how she would handle them. How she would turn their arrogance against them. She pictured each step of her plan, visualizing it like a movie in her head. First, she would gather information. She would learn their routines, their habits, their weaknesses. Then, she would strike. Not directly, not yet, but in ways that would confuse and frustrate them. Ways that would make them question themselves. Finally, when the time was right, she would reveal her true self. Show them who they were really dealing with. It wouldn't be easy. It would take patience, skill, and courage. But she was ready. More than ready. Because deep down, she knew one thing for certain: justice always wins. Always. Before leaving the gas station, the woman took one last look at the bikers. They were still laughing, still shouting. Still acting like nothing could touch them. She felt a mix of emotions: anger, pity, determination. Anger at their cruelty. Pity for their ignorance. Determination to set things right. She climbed into her car and started the engine. The sound was quiet compared to the roar of the motorcycles, but it was steady. Reliable. Like her. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The bikers were still there, oblivious to what was coming. Oblivious to the fact that their fun was about to turn into something far more serious. The woman smiled to herself as she drove. She had a plan. A good one. And when the time was right, she would put it into action. But for now, she would wait. Patience was key. Timing was everything. And Emily Dawson, retired spy, knew exactly how to play the game. As the elderly woman drove away, the bikers cheered even louder. To them, it felt like a victory. They had scared her off. Made her run away. In their minds, they were untouchable. Unstoppable. The leader grinned, flexing his arms as if to show off his strength. "That's right, Grandma. Don't come back," he shouted after her, though she was already too far to hear. The younger biker high-fived him, laughing nervously. "Man, that was awesome. Did you see her face? She was so scared." The others joined in, patting each other on the back and making jokes about how easy it had been to intimidate her. One of them mimicked her shaky movements, pretending to stumble and fall. Another kicked at the ground where her cane had landed earlier, sending it skittering farther away. They thought it was funny. Entertaining. Proof of how tough they were. But what they didn't realize was that their confidence was misplaced. Their laughter wasn't a sign of strength, it was a sign of arrogance. And arrogance, as Emily knew all too well, could be a fatal flaw. Back in her car, Emily gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her knuckles turned white, but her expression remained calm. She wasn't angry, not exactly. Anger would cloud her judgment, and she couldn't afford that. Instead, she focused on something else: purpose. A sense of duty. These men had disrespected her, yes, but more importantly, they represented a bigger problem. Bullying. Cruelty. A lack of respect for others. Emily had seen people like them before. People who thought they were better than everyone else. Who used fear to control those around them. In her spy days, she had dealt with criminals, terrorists, and dictators, all of whom shared the same mindset as these bikers. They believed they were untouchable. That no one would stand up to them. But Emily wasn't just anyone. She had spent decades learning how to handle people like this. How to outsmart them. How to turn their own weaknesses against them. And now, retired or not, she still had those skills. Those instincts. She wasn't about to let these men get away with what they had done. Her mind raced as she drove home. She replayed the scene in her head, their words, their actions, their body language. Every detail mattered. Every piece of information could help her plan her next move. She remembered the leader's stance. Tall and imposing, but stiff. He carried himself like someone who relied on brute force rather than strategy. His voice had been loud, almost theatrical, as if he needed to convince not only her but also his friends that he was strong. That told her something important: he was insecure. He needed validation from others to feel powerful. The younger biker was different. Nervous. Eager to please. He reminded her of rookies she had trained during her spy days, eager but inexperienced. Easy to manipulate if you knew how. And the rest of the group? Followers. None of them had stepped forward to stop the bullying. None of them had questioned whether it was right or wrong. They simply went along with whatever the leader did, afraid to speak up or stand out. These observations gave Emily an advantage. She understood them better than they understood themselves. And understanding was the first step toward defeating them. By the time Emily pulled into her driveway, she had a rough outline of her plan. It wasn't fully formed yet, she needed more information, but the basics were clear. She would teach these men a lesson. A lesson they wouldn't forget. Step 1, gather intelligence. She needed to know more about them. Where they lived. Where they hung out. what they did when they weren't causing trouble. This part would require patience, observation, maybe even a little bit of sneaking around. But Emily was good at that. Better than anyone realized. Step 2, create doubt. Once she had enough information, she would start planting seeds of confusion. Little things that would make them question themselves. Question each other. Things that seemed random at first but would eventually add up to something bigger. Step 3, strike. When the time was right, she would reveal herself. Show them who they were really dealing with. Make sure they understood the consequences of their actions. It was a simple plan, but effective. Emily didn't need flashy gadgets or complicated schemes. All she needed was timing, precision, and a little bit of creativity. As Emily walked into her house, she paused for a moment to catch her breath. Her knees ached, and her hands trembled slightly. For a brief second, she wondered if she was being foolish. After all, she was older now. Retired. Was it really worth stirring up trouble over something like this? But then she shook her head, dismissing the thought. Age didn't matter. What mattered was doing the right thing. Standing up for what was fair. Protect herself, yes, but also protect others who might become targets of these men in the future. Her mind drifted back to her early days as a spy. She remembered her first mission, a dangerous assignment in a foreign country where failure meant death. At the time, she had been terrified. Unsure of herself. But she had pushed through the fear, relying on her training and instincts to survive. By the end of the mission, she had proven not only to her superiors but also to herself that she was capable of greatness. Over the years, she had faced countless challenges. Some had been physical fights, chases, escapes. Others had been mental puzzles, codes, negotiations. Each one had taught her something new. Each one had made her stronger. Now, standing in her quiet living room, Emily realized that retirement hadn't changed her. Not completely. She still had the same determination, the same resilience. The same desire to make a difference. The only difference was that now, she chose her battles carefully. And this battle? This was one worth fighting. Later that evening, Emily sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea and reviewing her plan. She spread out a map of the town, marking key locations, the gas station, the bikers' favorite hangouts, possible escape routes. She jotted down notes about their behavior, their habits, their weaknesses. Next, she opened a hidden compartment in the sideboard. Inside lay tools from her spy days, gadgets and devices that most people would never believe existed. There was a small listening device, perfect for eavesdropping on conversations. A pair of night vision goggles, ideal for observing without being seen. And a sleek metal rod that doubled as both a walking stick and a weapon. Emily smiled faintly as she examined the items. They brought back memories of missions past. Of victories won. Of justice served. She hadn't used them in years, but they were still in perfect condition. Ready to be put to use once again. For now, though, she set them aside. Tonight wasn't the time for action. Tonight was for preparation. Tomorrow, she would begin gathering information. Watching. Learning. And when she had everything she needed, she would strike. As the night wore on, Emily allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the bikers and what they represented. Bullies. Thugs. Men who thought they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. It wasn't just about her, they were a threat to the entire community. If left unchecked, they would continue to cause harm. Hurt innocent people. Destroy lives. But Emily refused to let that happen. She had fought against evil in many forms throughout her life, and she wasn't about to stop now. Retirement didn't mean giving up. It meant choosing your battles wisely. And this was a battle she intended to win. With that thought in mind, Emily finished her tea and stood up. She stretched her arms, feeling a renewed sense of energy coursing through her veins. She wasn't tired anymore. She was ready. Ready to take on whatever came next. Tomorrow would be the start of something big. Something important. Something that would remind those bikers and anyone else watching that no one was above justice. No matter how tough they thought they were. Back home later that evening, the woman sat alone in her dimly lit kitchen. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of crickets chirping outside. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the table where she sat. She held a cup of tea in her hands, sipping it slowly as steam curled up into the air. On the table in front of her lay an old photo album, its pages yellowed with age. She flipped through it gently, looking at black and white pictures of her younger days. To anyone watching, everything seemed normal. Just an elderly woman enjoying a peaceful evening at home. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind was working hard. Gears were turning. Thoughts were spinning. Plans were forming. Every movement those bikers had made, their body language, their tone, their careless arrogance played over in her mind like a movie. She remembered every detail. Every word they said. Every laugh they shared. And she analyzed it all, piece by piece. As she looked at the photos in the album, her thoughts drifted back to earlier that day. She pictured the gas station parking lot. The loud engines of the motorcycles. The way the leader had leaned down to sneer at her. The way his friends had laughed when he kicked her cane aside. She replayed the scene again and again in her head. Not because she was upset or scared, but because she was studying them. Learning about them. Understanding them. The leader stood out the most. He was tall and muscular, with tattoos covering his arms. His voice was rough, almost growling when he spoke. But there was something else about him too. Something subtle. He carried himself like someone who wanted to look strong but wasn't truly confident. His posture was stiff, almost forced. Like he was trying too much to act tough. The younger biker was different. Smaller and quicker, he moved nervously, glancing at the leader for approval. He reminded her of a puppy eager to please its master. Easy to manipulate if you knew how. The rest of the group hung back, laughing and cheering. They didn't seem to have much personality of their own. They just followed the leader, doing whatever he did. Afraid to stand out or speak up. These observations gave her clues. Clues about their weaknesses. About how to handle them. About how to turn their arrogance against them. After finishing her tea, the woman set the cup down and reached for a side table nearby. Her fingers brushed against a hidden compartment in the wood. With a soft click, the compartment opened, revealing items from her past. Items most people would never believe existed. Inside lay a sleek, compact device. It looked simple enough, a small box with buttons and wires, but it was far from ordinary. This gadget could disable anything electronic within 100 feet. Phones, cars, motorcycles, all of it would stop working instantly if she pressed the right button. Beside the device rested a set of throwing knives. They gleamed in the lamplight, sharp and deadly despite years of disuse. Each knife was perfectly balanced, designed for precision and accuracy. Emily had used them many times during her spy days, taking down enemies silently and efficiently. But she didn't need weapons to take care of herself. Not really. What she truly excelled at was strategy. Patience. Timing. Those were her greatest tools. And these bikers had given her all three ingredients for revenge. By morning, Emily had already mapped out their routes. She had identified their weak points. And she had planned exactly how to turn the tables. All she needed now was the perfect moment to strike. She started by gathering information. She knew the bikers liked to hang out at a certain diner on the edge of town. They parked their motorcycles outside and spent hours drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, and talking loudly. Sometimes they caused trouble there too, shouting at waitresses, leaving messes, refusing to pay their bills. Emily decided to visit the diner the next day. She dressed casually in her usual sweater and skirt and walked in like any other customer. She ordered a slice of pie and sat at a corner table, pretending to read a book. But her eyes were sharp, observant. She watched the bikers carefully, listening to their conversations without seeming to. They talked about their plans for the weekend. About races they wanted to hold. About pranks they thought were funny. None of them noticed her sitting there, quietly taking notes in her head. From the diner, Emily followed them to their next stop, a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of town. It looked abandoned, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. But inside, it was clear the bikers used it as a meeting place. They stored extra parts for their motorcycles there and even had makeshift beds set up in one corner. Emily memorized the layout of the warehouse. She noted the entrances and exits. The places where shadows fell darkest. The spots where sound carried farthest. Everything she saw gave her ideas. Ideas for how to catch them off guard. How to make them regret ever crossing her path. As the days passed, Emily began noticing patterns in the bikers' behavior. Patterns that helped her plan her next steps. For example, she realized the leader always arrived last. He liked making grand entrances, revving his motorcycle engine as he pulled into the parking lot. His friends cheered whenever he showed up, treating him like a hero. Emily guessed this meant he craved attention. That he needed others to admire him to feel important. The younger biker, meanwhile, often lingered near the edges of the group. He didn't join in their jokes as much as the others. Instead, he watched the leader closely, waiting for cues on what to do or say. Emily figured he was insecure. Unsure of himself. Someone who relied on the leader for guidance. The rest of the bikers were followers. They laughed when the leader laughed. Shouted when he shouted. Did whatever he told them to do. They didn't think for themselves. They just went along with the crowd. These revelations gave Emily confidence. Confidence that her plan would work. Because she understood them better than they understood themselves. Before making her final move, Emily decided to test the waters. She wanted to see how the bikers would react to small disruptions. Disruptions she could create without revealing herself. One night, she snuck into the warehouse while they were asleep. Using her gadget, she disabled their motorcycles. When they woke up the next morning, none of the bikes would start. The leader grew angry, shouting orders and blaming his friends. But no one could figure out what had happened. Another time, she left tiny clues around the diner. Notes written in code. Messages that hinted at someone watching them. At first, the bikers laughed it off, thinking it was a prank. But after a few days, they started looking over their shoulders. Whispering nervously. Wondering if someone was out to get them. Each disruption planted seeds of doubt in their minds. Seeds that would grow into fear. Fear that they weren't as untouchable as they thought. Through it all, Emily remained patient. She didn't rush. She waited for the perfect moment to strike. The moment when their arrogance would reach its peak. When they would feel safest. Most secure. And when that moment came, she would be ready. Ready to show them who they were really dealing with. Ready to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. Until then, she continued her preparations. Watching. Waiting. Planning. Because patience was key. Timing was everything. And Emily Dawson, retired spy, knew exactly how to play the game. Emily spent the next few days honing her skills of observation. She knew that understanding her enemies was crucial to defeating them. Every detail mattered: the way they spoke, how they moved, even the smallest quirks in their behavior. These details were like puzzle pieces, and Emily was putting them together one by one. Each morning, she would wake up early, dress in plain clothes, and head to places where the bikers frequented. Sometimes it was the diner on the edge of town. Other times, it was the gas station or the warehouse. She blended into the background effortlessly, appearing as just another harmless elderly woman going about her day. At the diner, she noticed how the leader always sat at the same table near the window. He liked being seen. Liked having everyone know he was in charge. His friends gathered around him, laughing at his jokes and nodding along with whatever he said. They treated him like a king, and he soaked up the attention like a sponge. But Emily saw cracks in his armor. When no one was looking, his smile faltered. His eyes darted around the room nervously, as if he expected trouble. It was subtle, but it told her something important: he wasn't as confident as he pretended to be. Beneath his tough exterior lay insecurity. Fear. And fear was something Emily could exploit. The younger biker, on the other hand, stayed quieter. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when he did, his voice was hesitant. He often glanced at the leader for approval, waiting for a nod or a smirk before saying anything. Emily guessed he was new to the group. Someone trying to prove himself but unsure of how to fit in. This made him unpredictable. Dangerous in his own way, but also vulnerable. The rest of the bikers were followers. They laughed loudly, joked crudely, and acted tough, but none of them showed any real leadership. They clung to the leader because they didn't know what else to do. Without him, they would fall apart. These observations gave Emily confidence. Confidence that her plan would work. Because she understood them better than they understood themselves. While gathering information, Emily began planting seeds of doubt among the bikers. She wanted them to feel uneasy. To question whether they were truly safe. To wonder if someone was watching them. One night, she snuck into the warehouse while they were asleep. Using her gadget, she disabled their motorcycles. When they woke up the next morning, none of the bikes would start. The leader grew furious, shouting orders and blaming his friends. But no one could figure out what had happened. "Did you mess with my bike again?" the leader yelled at the younger biker, who cowered under his glare. "No, man. I swear I didn't touch it," the younger biker stammered, holding up his hands defensively. The argument escalated quickly, with accusations flying back and forth. For the first time, Emily saw cracks forming in their unity. Suspicion crept in. Trust began to erode. Another time, Emily left tiny clues around the diner. Notes written in code. Messages that hinted at someone watching them. One note read, "You think you're untouchable. You're wrong." Another said, "Every move you make is being watched." At first, the bikers laughed it off, thinking it was a prank. But after a few days, they started looking over their shoulders. Whispering nervously. Wondering if someone was out to get them. "What's going on, boss?" one of the bikers asked during a meeting at the warehouse. "These notes keep showing up everywhere. Who's doing this?" "I don't know," the leader snapped, clearly irritated. "But if I find out, I'll make sure they regret it." His words sounded tough, but Emily noticed the tension in his voice. The flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The seeds of doubt were growing. Taking root. And soon, they would blossom into full-blown fear. Between her missions of observation and sabotage, Emily found herself reflecting on her past. Memories of her spy days came flooding back, vivid and clear as if they had happened yesterday. She remembered one particular mission in a bustling city overseas. Her task had been to retrieve classified documents from a heavily guarded building. The mission required stealth, precision, and quick thinking. She had spent weeks studying the guards' routines, memorizing their schedules, and identifying weak points in their security. On the night of the operation, she slipped into the building unnoticed. Moving silently through the shadows, she avoided cameras and bypassed alarms with ease. When a guard spotted her, she used a simple distraction, a dropped coin, to draw his attention away long enough to slip past. By the time anyone realized what had happened, she was already miles away, the documents safely tucked inside her bag. That mission had taught her an important lesson: success wasn't about brute force. It was about strategy, patience, timing. Those same principles applied now. The bikers might have strength and numbers on their side, but Emily had something far more valuable: experience, knowledge, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. As she flipped through the pages of her old photo album, she paused at a picture of herself in her prime. She looked so different then: strong, fearless, unstoppable. But deep down, she realized she hadn't changed much. The years had added wrinkles to her face and slowed her steps, but her mind was as sharp as ever. Her instincts were still intact. And her determination? Stronger than ever. With each passing day, Emily's plan became clearer. She had mapped out their routes, identified their weaknesses, and planted enough seeds of doubt to weaken their confidence. Now, it was time to prepare for the final strike. She spent hours reviewing her gadgets, making sure everything was in working order. The sleek device that could disable electronics was fully charged. The throwing knives gleamed under the light, sharp and ready. Even her cane, which doubled as a weapon, was polished and sturdy. But weapons weren't her primary focus. What Emily truly excelled at was strategy. She envisioned every possible scenario, planning for every outcome. If the leader tried to fight back, she knew exactly how to disarm him. If the younger biker panicked and ran, she had a plan to cut him off. If the others scattered, she could pick them off one by one. Her greatest advantage, however, was timing. She waited until the bikers felt safest, most secure. That's when she would strike. When their arrogance reached its peak. When they least expected it. The night before her final move, Emily sat alone in her kitchen once again. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of crickets outside. She sipped tea slowly, letting the warmth spread through her body. Her mind was calm, focused, ready. She thought about the bikers and what they represented. Bullies. Thugs. Men who thought they could hurt others without consequences. But Emily refused to let that happen. She had fought against evil in many forms throughout her life, and she wasn't about to stop now. Retirement didn't mean giving up. It meant choosing your battles wisely. And this was a battle she intended to win. With that thought in mind, Emily stood up and stretched her arms. She felt a renewed sense of energy coursing through her veins. She wasn't tired anymore. She was ready. Ready to take on whatever came next. Tomorrow would be the start of something big. Something important. Something that would remind those bikers and anyone else watching that no one was above justice. No matter how tough they thought they were. 2 nights later, the bikers gathered at their usual hangout, a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was dark and quiet outside, with only the sound of crickets chirping in the distance. Inside, though, things were loud and rowdy. The bikers laughed, drank beer, and told stories about all the trouble they had caused. They talked about how tough they were and how no one dared to stand up to them. They felt safe. Untouchable. Completely unaware that someone was watching them from the shadows. Suddenly, everything changed. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room whole. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then panic rippled through the group. Their phones wouldn't turn on. Their motorcycles refused to start. Even the hum of electricity seemed to vanish, leaving behind an eerie stillness. "What the hell is going on?" the leader barked, his voice sharp and angry. He stumbled around blindly, trying to find his way in the pitch-black room. His friends fumbled too, bumping into each other and shouting questions. Then came the sound: a soft click, followed by a voice so calm it sent chills down their spines. "Looking for me?" From the shadows stepped the elderly woman. Her posture was straighter now, taller. Gone was the cane she usually carried. Instead, she held a sleek metal rod in her hand. In the faint glow of moonlight streaming through broken windows, her eyes gleamed with a fierce intensity that silenced even the toughest among them. "You picked the wrong person to mess with," she said, her tone icy. "Now it's time to pay." The bikers froze. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. They stared at the woman, unable to believe what they were seeing. This wasn't the frail old lady they had bullied at the gas station. This was someone else entirely. Someone strong. Dangerous. Unstoppable. The leader was the first to react. "What are you doing here, Grandma?" he sneered, trying to sound brave. But his voice wavered slightly, betraying his fear. "You think you can scare us? You're crazy." The woman didn't respond. Instead, she took a step forward, her movements smooth and deliberate. She held the metal rod loosely in one hand, letting it swing gently as if it weighed nothing. Her calm demeanor unnerved the bikers even more. They weren't used to being faced with someone who wasn't afraid of them. "Get her," the leader shouted, pointing at her. Two of the bikers lunged toward her, fists raised. But before they could reach her, she moved with lightning speed. With a quick flick of her wrist, she swung the metal rod, knocking one of them off his feet. The other tried to grab her, but she sidestepped easily, twisting his arm behind his back until he cried out in pain. The rest of the group hesitated, unsure of what to do. They had never seen anyone fight like this before. It was as if she knew exactly where to strike, how to counter every move they made. One by one, they tried to attack her, but none stood a chance. Decades of training kicked in as she moved with precision, dismantling each opponent without breaking a sweat. She was fast, strong, calculating. Every movement she made was purposeful, designed to neutralize her enemies quickly and efficiently. By the time dawn broke, the warehouse was empty except for the groaning bikers tied up neatly in a corner, waiting for the police to arrive. And standing amidst the chaos was the woman, brushing dust off her hands as if nothing unusual had happened. Let's pause here for a moment and talk about how the woman managed to pull this off. How did she defeat a group of tough bikers all by herself? First, she used her gadgets. Remember the sleek device she kept hidden in her side table? That gadget disabled everything electronic within 100 feet. Phones, motorcycles, lights, all of it stopped working instantly when she pressed the button. This left the bikers confused and vulnerable, giving her the upper hand right from the start. Next, she relied on her training. Years of spy work had taught her how to fight, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to read people's movements. She knew exactly where to hit to disarm someone or knock them down. Her skills were sharp, precise, and effective. Finally, she used psychology. By staying calm and confident, she threw the bikers off balance. They expected her to be scared or weak, but instead, she was fearless. This mental edge gave her an advantage that physical strength alone couldn't match. As the fight unfolded, the bikers realized too late that they had underestimated her. Each of them tried to take her down, but none succeeded. Let's look at how she handled them individually. The leader was the first to charge at her. He swung his fist wildly, aiming for her face. But she ducked under his arm and delivered a swift kick to his knee, sending him crashing to the ground. Before he could get up, she pinned him down with the metal rod, pressing it against his throat just hard enough to make him stop struggling. The younger biker, the nervous one, tried to sneak up behind her while she dealt with the leader. But she heard him coming. Without turning around, she spun and jabbed the rod into his stomach, doubling him over. A quick twist of his wrist later, and he was lying on the floor, clutching his arm in pain. The others were no better. Some tried to surround her, thinking they could overwhelm her with numbers. But she moved like water, flowing between them and striking with deadly accuracy. One punch to the jaw here. A sweep of the leg there. Within minutes, they were all on the ground, groaning and defeated. Once all the bikers were down, the woman wasted no time. She pulled out a roll of rope from her bag and began tying them up. Her movements were efficient, practiced. She secured their hands behind their backs and looped the rope around their ankles, making sure they couldn't escape. She worked quietly, ignoring their protests and threats. "You'll regret this," one of them spat. "When we get free, you're dead." The woman simply smiled. "We'll see about that," she said calmly, tightening the knots. By the time she finished, the bikers were lined up neatly in a corner of the warehouse, looking like oversized packages wrapped in rope. She stood back to admire her work, brushing dust off her hands as if she had just finished cleaning the house. Back in the dim light of the warehouse, the bikers sat tied up, their bravado gone. They looked smaller now, weaker. The leader, who had once strutted around like a king, hung his head in shame. His friends avoided eye contact, too embarrassed to speak. The woman walked over to them, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she just stood there, watching them squirm. Then she leaned down slightly, speaking in a low, steady voice. "This is what happens when you bully people," she said. "When you think you're untouchable. When you hurt others because you can. You might have power over some people, but not everyone will let you walk all over them." Her words hit home. The bikers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. They had never thought about the consequences of their actions before. To them, bullying was just a game, a way to feel big and important. But now, faced with the reality of their behavior, they felt small. Ashamed. "I called the police," the woman continued. "They'll be here soon. Maybe this will teach you a lesson. Maybe it won't. Either way, I hope you remember tonight. Remember that justice always wins." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the bikers to stew in their own misery. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the broken windows, the woman stood amidst the chaos she had created. The warehouse was a mess: overturned chairs, spilled drinks, and groaning bikers tied up in the corner. But she didn't seem bothered by any of it. She brushed a strand of gray hair out of her face and adjusted her sweater. Then she picked up her bag and slung it over her shoulder. For a brief moment, she paused to take in the scene. A small smile played on her lips, but it wasn't one of triumph. It was satisfaction. The kind that comes from knowing you've done the right thing. She glanced at the bikers one last time before heading toward the exit. As she stepped outside, the cool morning air greeted her. Birds chirped in the trees, and the world seemed peaceful again. Like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something important. Those bikers would never forget this night. And neither would anyone else who heard the story. The next morning, news of what happened at the warehouse spread like wildfire. People in the small town couldn't stop talking about it. At first, no one believed the story. A quiet grandmother taking down an entire biker gang? It sounded like something out of a movie. But as more details came out, everyone realized it was true. Reporters from nearby towns arrived to interview the woman. They wanted to know how she had done it. How had someone so small and seemingly frail managed to defeat a group of tough, rowdy bikers? When they asked her, she simply smiled a calm, knowing smile, and said, "Sometimes, the best weapon is the element of surprise." Her words stuck with people. They made them think. Because deep down, everyone understood what she meant. The bikers had underestimated her. They thought she was weak. Easy to push around. And that mistake had cost them everything. As for the bikers, their lives changed drastically after that night. The police arrived at the warehouse shortly after the woman left. They found the bikers tied up neatly in a corner, looking miserable and defeated. When the officers untied them, the bikers tried to explain what had happened, but their stories didn't add up. Some claimed they had been attacked by a group of masked strangers. Others insisted it was some kind of prank gone wrong. None of them admitted the truth that a single elderly woman had beaten them all. Once the police pieced together the events, charges were filed against the bikers. They faced a long list of crimes: harassment, vandalism, attempted assault, and even theft. Their reign of terror in the town ended that night. Thanks to the woman's bravery, they were finally held accountable for their actions. The leader of the gang, the tall, muscular man with tattoos, was hit hardest. He had always acted like he was untouchable, like no one could ever challenge him. But now, sitting in a jail cell, he realized how wrong he had been. His friends weren't there to cheer him on anymore. No one respected him. He was just another criminal waiting for his trial. The younger biker, the nervous one who had kicked her cane at the gas station, felt the weight of his mistakes too. He had joined the gang hoping to feel important, but now he saw how foolish that dream had been. In court, he apologized for his role in bullying the woman, saying he wished he had never listened to the leader. It was a small step toward redemption, but it showed that maybe, just maybe, he had learned something. In the weeks that followed, the townspeople began treating the woman differently. Before, they had seen her as just another older person, kind, quiet, unremarkable. Now, they saw her as a hero. Someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was dangerous. At first, people were curious. They stopped her on the street to ask questions. "Is it true you took down those bikers?" they would say, their eyes wide with amazement. She always answered politely, brushing off the attention. "I just did what needed to be done," she would reply. Anyone would have done the same. But deep down, the townspeople knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have stood up to those bikers. Most people would have stayed silent, afraid of getting hurt. That's what made her special. She wasn't afraid to fight back, not because she wanted glory, but because it was the right thing to do. Soon, the respect turned into admiration. Neighbors brought her homemade pies and fresh flowers. Kids waved to her as she walked by. Even the local newspaper wrote an article calling her a local legend. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen. Truly valued. The story of the woman and the bikers became a lesson for the entire town. It reminded people that strength doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes, the strongest person isn't the loudest or the biggest. Sometimes, it's the quiet one. The one who listens. The one who plans carefully before acting. Parents told the story to their children, using it as an example of courage and justice. Teachers discussed it in classrooms, asking students what they thought about standing up to bullies. Even the mayor mentioned it during a speech, praising the woman for showing that anyone can make a difference if they try. The bikers' downfall also sent a clear message to others who might consider causing trouble in the town. Word spread quickly that the woman wasn't someone to mess with. And while most people didn't know about her past as a spy, they didn't need to. Her actions spoke for themselves. For the woman, life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be after becoming a local celebrity. She continued her daily routines, shopping at the gas station, tending to her garden, and baking cookies for her grandchildren. But now, she did these things with a new sense of pride. Not because of the attention she received, but because she had proven to herself that she still had what it takes to protect others. She kept her gadgets hidden away, just in case she ever needed them again. But for now, the town felt safer. Calmer. The bikers were gone, and their absence made a big difference. People smiled more. They talked to each other instead of avoiding eye contact. It was as if the whole community had taken a deep breath and relaxed. Still, the woman stayed alert. She knew better than anyone that trouble could come knocking at any time. But she also knew she was ready. Ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, the woman sat on her porch, sipping tea and watching the world go by. Her mind drifted back to the night at the warehouse. To the look of shock on the bikers' faces when they realized they had been beaten. To the sound of their groans as she tied them up. She didn't feel proud in the way some people might expect. She didn't see herself as a hero. To her, what she had done was simple. Necessary. Something anyone with enough determination could achieve. But she did feel satisfied. Satisfied that she had stood up for herself. Satisfied that she had protected others. Satisfied that justice had been served. As she finished her tea, she leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. The crickets chirped softly in the background, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. Everything felt peaceful. Right. She opened her eyes and smiled. Life was good. And she was exactly where she was meant to be. Never judge a book by its cover, the woman often reminded people when they praised her bravery. Because sometimes, the quietest soul carries the fiercest heart. These words stuck with everyone who heard them. They were simple, yet powerful. People nodded their heads in agreement, thinking about how true those words were not just for the woman, but for life in general. The story of the elderly woman and the bikers taught everyone an important lesson. It showed that appearances can be deceiving. Just because someone looks ordinary or even weak doesn't mean they are. True strength isn't always visible on the outside. Sometimes, it's hidden beneath layers of calmness, patience, and wisdom. Let's take a moment to think about what this story teaches us. Here are a few key lessons. 1. Don't underestimate others. The bikers made a big mistake when they underestimated the woman. They thought she was harmless because of how she looked. But looks can fool you. The next time you meet someone new or even someone you think you already know, remember not to jump to conclusions. You never know what someone is capable of. 2. Courage comes in many forms. Courage doesn't always mean being loud or bold. Sometimes, it means staying calm under pressure. It means thinking carefully before acting. And it means standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. The woman showed us that courage comes in many forms and all of them are worth respecting. 3. Justice always wins. No matter how tough or scary someone seems, bad behavior will eventually catch up with them. The bikers thought they could bully people without consequences. But in the end, justice caught up with them, thanks to the woman's determination. This reminds us that doing the right thing pays off in the long run. 4. Strength isn't about size. Some people think strength is about muscles or size. But real strength is about character. It's about having the guts to stand up for yourself and others. It's about using your brain instead of just your fists. The woman proved that strength has nothing to do with how big or strong you look, it's about what's inside. This story isn't just about the woman or the bikers. It's about all of us. It's a reminder to treat others with kindness and respect. To avoid judging people based on how they look or act. And to remember that everyone has value even if it's not obvious at first glance. Think about your own life. Have you ever judged someone too quickly? Maybe you saw someone who seemed shy or quiet and assumed they weren't interesting. Or maybe you met someone who looked different from you and didn't give them a chance. If so, this story is a good reminder to rethink those assumptions. On the flip side, have you ever felt underestimated? Have people looked at you and thought you couldn't do something because of how you look or sound? If so, this story shows that you shouldn't let those opinions hold you back. Believe in yourself. Trust your abilities. Because like the woman in this story, you might surprise everyone including yourself. The woman in this story wasn't flashy or attention-seeking. She didn't wear a cape or carry a sword. She was just an ordinary person living an ordinary life. But when the moment came, she stepped up and did something extraordinary. That's a powerful message. It tells us that heroes aren't always the people we expect them to be. Sometimes, they're the ones sitting quietly in the corner. The ones who blend into the background. The ones who don't draw attention to themselves until it's absolutely necessary. Think about the people in your own life. Who are the quiet heroes around you? Maybe it's a teacher who works tirelessly to help students succeed. Or a neighbor who always checks in on others. Or even a family member who supports you without asking for anything in return. These people may not get a lot of recognition, but their actions make a big difference. One of the most important lessons from this story is that true power lies within. It's not about what you look like on the outside. It's about what's inside you, your heart, your mind, your spirit. The woman had spent years training herself to be strong not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. She had learned how to stay calm under pressure. How to think clearly in difficult situations. How to use her skills wisely. Those qualities made her powerful, far more than any weapon or gadget ever could. This is something we can all strive for. We can work on building our inner strength. On becoming better listeners, thinkers, and problem solvers. On treating others with kindness and fairness. When we focus on these things, we become stronger not just for ourselves, but for the people around us. So, what did you learn from this story? Did it inspire you to see people differently? To believe in yourself more? To stand up for what's right? Take a moment to reflect on these questions. Think about how the lessons from this story apply to your own life. Maybe you'll decide to be kinder to someone who seems different from you. Or maybe you'll find the courage to speak up when something feels wrong. Whatever it is, remember that every action matters. Every choice makes a difference. As the woman said, sometimes, the quietest soul carries the fiercest heart. Let that idea stay with you. Let it remind you to look beyond appearances. To appreciate the hidden strengths in others and in yourself. Now it's your turn. What did you take away from this story? Was there a part that stood out to you? A lesson that resonated deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you liked this story, pass it along to someone else. Tell your friends, your family, your classmates. Because stories like this have the power to change how we see the world and each other. Thank you for reading. Until next time, keep believing in the power of kindness, courage, and justice. After all, you never know when you might need to step up and be a hero yourself.